is a little slow, I think, isn't it? Because it's, what, is this a little slow? I got 9:56. It's 10 o'clock. Reset that sometime. I don't know if she got afraid or. Okay. I think, would it be better if I slid over a little bit so that, because, yeah, well, it's straight rows like this, because I noticed that last week as well. You know, I never saw anybody in this row except for the first person. It's okay if you don't see me, but I want to see you. You know what I mean, Bhante? Or look down. Yeah. Move over a little. Which might mean adjusting this a little bit as well. It's nice to see this many people here on a beautiful Saturday morning. And of course, there's nothing else you'd rather be doing, right? That's why we're here. Just as a reminder, I'm going to pass this around, and I'll put a pen in here too. And so this is week class 3. So next to your name, just check off class 3. If you missed, if you missed last week, this didn't go around the first class. And so if you missed last week, you'll have to add your name and then just make a check that you were here last week. I mean, not last week, but the week before, right? Does everybody understand what I'm trying to say? So if you're here, add, and you're not on here, add your name and then make the appropriate checks for the days that you were here. I'm not sure where to start this, I guess, with the chair people. What I'd like to do is to get rid of that phone first of all. We're getting into a real important, well, the entire book and the entire aspect of this is important, but we're getting into an area where I want to try to clarify some things, and then we'll do a meditation later on. But just to do a quick review of last week, we talked about the hindrances and the fetters. And again, I suggest that you memorize the hindrances so that when they do come up, which they always do, right? When they do come up, we recognize them and we know what we're working with. And it's basically everything that throws off our concentration or anything that kind of derails us from being content or derails us from resting, in our true nature, I guess you could say. The fetters are the roots, what we're calling the roots to these hindrances. In other words, they're more stable and they're not necessarily anything that we can just kind of pluck out and take care of. So they're not just that, like that. The hindrances, I get, in many ways could be compared to a rising and falling of the thoughts or the mind states, these kind of things. But the fetters are more, they have much more gluey, sticky substance to them, and they have to be worked with quite a bit. And those are usually done with the deeper jhanas, which we'll be talking about later on. I think chapter 14, actually. But last week was primarily the hindrances, how to work with them, and the fetters. And then setting your intent, then the practice itself, we talked about setting your intention, and then doing a metta practice, and then the practice of breath meditation. We'll talk more in detail about breath meditation here too. But I just want to see if there's any questions right off, and then I'll talk a little bit about the chapters that are coming up, and then we'll do a meditation, and we'll just kind of see if there's any more questions, and then that'll take us up to the end of the class. So are there any questions right now? Anything that... The reason I like to ask that right away is because if there's something that... If there's questions in a person's mind, it's kind of like we're looking for something and it's not settled. So if there's some answers some questions that could be answered, it helps settle the mind, even before we start the class.
In the metta meditation, when you say that you wish loving kindness to this person or that person, and then you bring that person into your mind, I start thinking about that person, and it just is really distracting. I mean, I start thinking, okay, you're wishing that person loving, and then you start thinking about all their problems. Oh, that'd be nice. It's just...
Yeah. The metta is a preliminary, and it's I guess it's common to do that, but compassion, it brings up compassion, and compassion isn't empathy necessarily. So that's something to keep in mind. So you don't necessarily, we're not necessarily feeling sorry for anybody or anything like that, but we're showing compassion in such a way that that there's a meeting with you and the other person, and just realizing that everybody is after the same thing. They're trying to get away from the stress, the worry, the pain of life, and that's basically it.
So you're not going into detail about their...
Yeah.
Like that might be what I'm doing.
Yeah, if that happens a little bit, it's okay, but you want to be able to certainly set that aside when you do when you set the intention to bring your attention to the breath. You want to be able to set all that aside. I mean, that's the key thing here. But we're all in the same boat. I mean, we're all trying to bring about more happiness and trying to do away with more pain and suffering. But the key to that, of course, when we talked about that, is not identifying with any of it, just seeing it for what it is. It's a good question, though. Anything else from anybody?
What you just said, seeing it for what it is.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have any concept about separating.
About that whole
Yeah.
that whole thing, huh? There's kind of a misconception with this type of practice that it's called concentration or jhana or absorption. It's sometimes people think that we're running away from the world, by being concentrated on something as silly as the breath, But if we have joy and happiness in our life, something that we find is joyful, we don't try to push it away. I mean, we try to, bring it in and enjoy it, right? I mean, simple pleasures of life. And so we don't say, no, I don't want to have anything to do with that joy and happiness. That's not for me. So we bring it in and we enjoy it. We probably found some things already this morning that we really enjoyed. I enjoy being here, for example. But we don't hang on to it. So, because if we hang on to it and not realize that this joy is just impermanent, it's just temporary, then as soon as it starts leaving, we start hurting. So even the pleasure can be painful, right? And it's not the pleasure itself, but it's from us trying to hang on and try to identify with that being my pleasure, that kind of thing. So that's the pleasure, but and then what about the negative stuff, the unpleasant things? So the first thing that we do, unpleasant things come up and we go, no, we push it away, that's not for me. But it's just like physical pain. If we have a physical pain in the body and we contract around it, it gets worse, right? Because we're putting pain, that contraction, on top of the pain that we already have. So if there's some pain and suffering, let's say we lose a loved one or something, and it's just devastating and we can't handle it, we try to push it away and it's just irritating us, we're causing more pain. So we want to see, that's what I mean by seeing things for what they are. That this stuff is arising, but we don't have to identify it as being something that we're going to hang on to. Because it's coming and it's going. That's what I mean by just seeing everything for impermanence. That's the whole thing behind our practice, is seeing the impermanence of everything. But that's not a negative, it's a positive, it's liberation for us. The three worldly conditions is what they're called: the impermanence, the suffering, and then the non-self. And these are some very, very deep teachings that are hard to understand. We can understand them, when I'm saying these words, we can go, oh yeah, everything, is shifting. It doesn't stay the same, so it's impermanent. We can understand that. And we can understand that if everything is changing all the time, then how can I actually say that this is mine and that this is going to be reliable for me to cause any kind of permanent happiness for me? Because you notice I'm using that permanent word again, and nothing is permanent. And then the other worldly condition is that there's no control, there's no identification, there's everything that we have is borrowed. And so in that respect, there's really no non-changing, permanent person behind all of this. We want to believe that because we're afraid of dying, So we want to believe that this, there's a permanent entity and there's this ego somehow will continue on, And so these teachings are very, we can understand them at this level. We can understand them at deeper levels too. And the Buddha, for example, he taught at many, many, many different levels. When you read the Dhammapada and all the different sutras, he taught very, very deep teachings, and he taught very, very light family teachings, morality, how to treat your neighbor, these kinds of things, which are very important. But what we're looking at here is being able to look at these very, very deep teachings, not from me or not from the book, but on our own by going into concentration, a little deeper meditation. So these are things that would arise on their own. I don't know if I addressed that with this group before, but if we would if we would practice consistently again and again every day, everything that we're reading and everything that I'm talking about would become evident, obvious to us, just by the practice. But what we're doing is speeding things up a little bit by kind of pointing these things out to you. Impermanence and suffering and non-self. And a lot of people think, well, these are negatives, but they're not. They're actually very, very freeing and very liberating. Otherwise, I wouldn't be talking about this stuff on a beautiful Saturday morning like this. Why bring everybody down? Huh? So we're going into chapters 8 and 9 in the book. I'm not suggesting you read ahead or anything. So the way these classes are designed is that I try to clarify everything, and then you can go home and read it, and then hopefully the reading will be a lot easier, and you can compare the reading with what we talked about in class here, that kind of thing. So I'm always addressing the chapters before you read them, supposedly, if you don't read ahead. And like Bhante said, don't read ahead, because then you'll know more than we do. So wouldn't want that to happen now. So the jhanas, there's 4 material jhanas, what are called 4 material jhanas, and there's 4 immaterial jhanas, and then there's what are usually called super mundane jhanas that are these super mundane jhanas are used to dig up the fetters that we talked about last week, the roots to these hindrances, which are much, much deeper. And if you didn't read that chapter, please do from last class. But before I even talk about the jhanas, I want to talk about kind of what is happening right now for many of us, probably. And there's something called there's access, or there's momentary concentration, and then what is called access concentration, and then what is called absorption, or jhana. Okay, and this momentary concentration is what. To be honest, when I sit and meditate, I notice momentary concentration quite a bit, and that's probably what we're experiencing right now. Sometimes you might be concentrated on what I'm saying. Sometimes you might be concentrated on the barking dog, or what happened this morning, or what you're going to be doing after class. So the analogy that I like to use is, I mix it up sometimes. We'll use a flower with a bee. So the bee, wants to use this nectar from the flower to make its honey, right? So there's a flower, and a bee is just kind of cruising around, noticing this flower, and it checks it out, and then it takes off again, and it comes back and checks it out, takes off again and checks it out. It's like when we sit and meditate, I say, okay, bring your attention to the breath. And then we do that. We bring our attention to the breath. And then all of a sudden the mind wanders off, and then it comes back. We notice it and it comes back. So it's back and forth, back and forth. That's momentary concentration. It's like that bee checking out that flower, taking off, checking out the flower, taking it off. And then the access concentration is a type of meditation that probably the majority of people use quite a bit. It's where that bee notices that flower and stays with it, but it's not exactly on it doing its work. It's very much with the flower, and it's kind of broad. Its attention on that flower is broad, so it's buzzing around. We've all seen bees or even hummingbirds checking things out. Like that's what they're really, really interested in. So this access concentration is when we focus on the breath, and these other thoughts and stuff are there, but we're very much on the breath, and it feels good, and we know that we're getting somewhere. And this is what happens right before we get into jhana. So, and when we recognize this, that I've been sitting here for quite a while, and my thoughts, the thoughts that I had earlier aren't there. They're not bothering me. Everything's becoming softer. That's probably access concentration. And don't even, I don't suggest, thinking of all this theory and oh, what was that word? I guess this is access concentration. I think that's what he said. Because, just don't even go there. Just kind of recognize what is happening. That's why I'm bringing this stuff up. And that's why it's in the book, too. And then the next step is jhana, and this deeper concentration. And the first jhana is when the first thing that we notice is that our desire to be someplace else or to do something else is not there anymore. There's nothing pulling us. We're sitting and we're comfortable, everything's good, and we're able to focus on the breath, and the gross thoughts are not there anymore. In other words, what I would consider the pondering or the thinking, those kind of thoughts aren't there. Let's say the thinking is gone. The thoughts are still there, but they're very, very subtle. They're not hurting us or anything like that. But what we notice, first of all, is the desire has subsided. So when that desire subsides, joy comes up. And it's kind of a recognition that, oh, this is nice, this works. And we just get happy. And sometimes you see people sitting with a smile on their face, and, just for no apparent reason. But that's when the first jhana is there. I'm going to go through these quick because we're going to be talking about these more into the course. But when we get into the second jhana, the thing that we notice is kind of a different type of, that energetic joy subsides, and there's more of a calmness to it. It's called sukha in the Pali language. So the calm kind of pervades, and the noticing is actually the second hindrance fades away, this aversion, this pushing away any kind of fear or anger or agitation or anything. So now we have desire gone, we have this agitation or fear or aversion has subsided as well. And the trademark is that this first kind of joy, where we kind of noticed it and we kind of wanted to smile, is even kind of subsiding, and everything is very, very, very calm. Then the third jhana, if we can sit long enough and get familiar with these other jhanas, we'll find ourselves in the third jhana. And what happens in the third jhana is there's much more of a one-pointedness and a noticing of like an equanimity and an equalness for everything. So anything that's pleasant or unpleasant that would come up or somehow be noticed, it wouldn't matter, because it would all blend together. It would all seem pretty much the same. And there's no restlessness and worry. So that's another hindrance that falls away. So there's no desire, no aversion, no restlessness, no worry. Things are looking pretty good, right? We're just sitting, and we're able to sit for a long time. Now the fourth jhana, there's a time factor involved, because the fourth jhana, we can sit in there as long as we want. We can predetermine a time. We could literally say, I'm going to sit in jhana for 32 minutes. And after 32 minutes, we would come out. I mean, actually, we would probably sit in longer than that, because we have to really establish a pretty pretty deep practice in order to get there. So let's say we're going to sit in fourth jhana for, for like 92 minutes. After 92 minutes, we would come out of it in suit. We'd go from fourth, third, second, back to one, and then out of jhana. And in fourth jhana, there's absolutely no effort at all. You can just sit with the meditation object. There's none of the mind being pulled away or being this way or that way. And there's absolutely no doubt in the practice at all. Up until very, very subtly up to this point, there can be a little bit, when you come out of the meditation, there can be a little bit of a question like, what was that? I mean, was this a certain kind of jhana, or was it third jhana, second jhana? What is going on here? But when you're in the fourth jhana, there's no doubt and there's no concern about what jhana you're in, because there's just absolute clarity. Everything is very, very, very clear. And then what we can do throughout these jhanas, particularly the fourth jhana, is use that to investigate these three worldly conditions: impermanence, dukkha or suffering, and a non-self. And then we fully understand how these things lead to liberation, complete freedom. And we know without a doubt that all of the worries and all the problems that we have are, truly brought on by ourselves. And the reason we know that, and we have no doubt about that, is because they've completely subsided. Nothing there. And happiness. So when all this subsides, happiness arises. So those are the first four jhanas. I think Bhante G or Bhante Gudarantana, he addresses these pretty well. But we'll be talking about them more in depth through the other chapters. We'll be looking at them at each one. Now, keeping in mind now, these are called material jhanas because they're related to the material world and the form. We're talking about hindrances, and these hindrances are like desire and anger and doubt and restlessness and worry. And all these things are mental things, just like when we dream, for example. We think that sleeping and dreaming is pretty relaxing, but it's still material. We dream about tigers and fires and houses and meeting people, but this is still a material world, right? We're thinking of form. We're thinking of this form as well. So material jhana is still addressing the material world. The next four areas of jhana, these are different stages or different steps, are called the immaterial jhanas. And this is an area where words really don't have any right being there to trying to explain these, because it's immaterial jhanas. But I'm going to try my best because I have to pay respect to Bhante Gudarantana for putting this book together and addressing the jhanas like this. It's funny when you look up meditation books, there's just tons and tons of books about mindfulness and different meditation practices that address the material world. What was that artist that somebody sang a song about the material world? Madonna? Was it Madonna? Yeah, it just came to my mind. Okay, living in a material world or something like that. But when you get into books about immaterial jhanas, there's very few, and that's why this book is a real gem, I think, because very few authors will dare to dip into the immaterial world and try to address it in words because it's hard to do. And it's probably easier to do live because, I mean, with people, and to use similes to try to define and address these immaterial jhanas. But the immaterial jhanas are the base of space. The word I'm looking for is infinite space. The base of infinite space is the very first, I mean, it sounds woo-woo, doesn't it? The very first jhana. And if you can imagine yourself floating in space, literally floating in the cosmos someplace. There's no fear, and there's no wondering what's happening or anything like that. You're just floating in space. So there's no bodily feeling of gravity. There's nothing holding you up. So you're suspended in space. And generally, when we're suspended in space, we think of maybe being like a spaceman and looking out and seeing the Earth in the distance, or seeing stars, or seeing other planets or something. But that's material. So where you're suspended in space and there is no looking out and seeing the stars, there's no stars, there's no Earth, there's no other planets or anything like that. There is nothing but space. So you're suspended in space. And that's the base of infinite space. This is actually something that you experience, and it's just, it comes on sometimes very, very quickly. It's just a vastness, okay? And then from that, of course, there's complete equanimity and everything that you experienced in the other four jhanas. But to go, and that's considered the fifth jhana. The sixth jhana is the base of infinite awareness, what is called infinite awareness. So there's that awareness that there is infinite space, right? So imagine if you're floating in this infinite space and you close your eyes, so that infinite space has no bearing on anything. The only thing that's recognized is that there is this awareness of what's happening. And Bhante Ji, we don't usually use one word to define another one, but Bhante Ji said it's awareness, similar to awareness, watching awareness. So there's a knowing that there's awareness, is all. So we're floating in space, we close our eyes, and there is this, I don't know, almost like a thusness. This stuff is here. Very, very subtle, right? We're talking about these very subtle things that are happening here. And then what could be more subtle than that? We go from fifth, sixth, and the seventh jhana is what is called the base of nothingness. So we go from vast open space to just simple awareness, from that simple awareness to emptiness, nothing. So that awareness alone is no longer. So no space, no awareness, just nothing. And the eighth jhana, what could even be more subtle than emptiness, is the base of neither perceiving or non-perceiving, or perception or non-perception. So even that awareness that there is emptiness, or even that feeling that there is emptiness, is not there. It's gone. It's like, so we go from this space to this awareness, to this emptiness, to perceiving of emptiness, and it's just into a complete void. And then we get into the supramundane jhanas, which are even deeper, but we'll talk about those later. And as I mentioned, we'll talk about all these at a deeper level. Now, the thing that we have to be really, really careful about is to understand that just because we can't close our eyes and go into these jhanas, it doesn't mean that we're bad meditators, or it doesn't mean that we're doing anything wrong. The reason these are addressed is because when they do happen, that they'll be recognized. And some people never actually get into a jhana where they can control it very well. And they're very good practitioners, and they're very good meditators, they're very good people. And so the downfall of explaining the jhanas to such a fine detail is that people feel reluctant to practice. They feel like they're not doing a very good job because they're not getting into this place. They feel inadequate somehow, and that's not fair. I mean, it's not what we're trying to do here. And it's very important that we recognize that as one of the hindrances. Because as I said before, doubt will derail you. Boom. And if there's doubt that you're doing your practice wrong because you're not getting into a certain jhana or something, just see that as one of the hindrances. Okay, any questions about any of that?
There's a lot of toggling back and forth between the jhanas.
Well, it can be. You don't. When you're doing that, you don't even think along that terms as going through these different levels. The only reason that there are these really these different levels is because if there wasn't some instructions, if there wasn't a teacher, when a person gets into the first jhana, they think they're totally enlightened. The very first one. They think this is it. There's something, and then first thing you want to do is call your meditation friends and say, hey, it's something really incredible happened here. But if you're talking to a teacher or something, they'll say, just forget about it and go back to practicing. And the meditator is like, really? I mean, this is huge. They say, forget about it, And often what happens is that person they do forget about it. They forget about the experience and everything. But then you go into it again, and then you learn how to control it. And you don't think in terms of unless you do it a lot of times about how many, going through different jhanas and stuff like that. The people that I know that have worked in jhanas, they usually are in a retreat. This is the situation. They're usually in a retreat, and it's usually a long retreat, and they'll report to their teacher. And if you ask them, what jhanas have you gone through? They're kind of vague, and they're saying, well, from the closest I can really recollect is that I was in like 6th jhana or 7th jhana. And some people will say, I can go through 1 through 4 and that's it. And they don't talk about the other jhanas at all. And that's one of the dangers of not knowing about the other jhanas, is because they go through 1 through maybe up to 4, and then and that's it. And then they go back down, and that's their practice. But the Buddha in most traditions will say there's more there. So going through these, toggling back and forth, it can feel like that on a theoretical or intellectual level, but not when you're really practicing.
I mean, you can fall out of the jhana quickly sometimes, though.
Yeah, just like falling into them.
Right,
It's
right.
literally like falling in,
Right.
falling into it. Yeah.
And you're like,
That's why the first one is you go, what is this?
and then you're out.
What is going on? And that's why you want to, and then afterwards you just sit there and go, I'm going to call Bob, or or whatever. I'm going to call Bhante. In chapter, I think it's chapter 9, well, I can't remember what chapter, but I want to talk directly about the practice itself and how to do this and how do we get into jhana and what it takes. And then we'll do a meditation and just see where we're at from there. There's less reading as the assignment as we go into this, because I purposely want us to do more practice in the class here, that kind of thing. So, for me to say, bring your attention to the breath and let's sit. For some people that have been meditating for a long time, that might be enough instruction, but to really look at the breath and make it very, very interesting is really the key. So we set the intention, first of all, that, maybe use a timer and say, I'm going to practice for an hour, and then we do a metta practice, and then we bring our attention to the breath and we just sit there, right? But Bhante G addresses breath meditation different ways, but in the chapter that you're going to be reading here, he talks about the beginning, the middle, and the end of each breath, which is a really good way of staying with the breath. We can use counting, we can use different methods to stay with the breath, but what I initially do, and some of you that have gone through the course with the book Minding the Breath, the book that I wrote, it talks a lot about the short breath and the long breath, but using the breath to inhale and bring energy into the body, and then exhale and relaxing the body. So we inhale and we notice that energy, we exhale and notice the relaxation. So it's constantly energy, relaxation, energy, relaxation. So it's like we're bringing our attention here and we're bringing our attention here, right? Energy, relaxation, energy, relaxation. But Bhante G mentions the middle too. So we're breathing in, we're breathing out, there's in the middle, in the bottom of the exhalation. Breathing in, the middle, and then the top of the exhalation, in the middle and the bottom. So at first, when we use this technique, we want to manipulate the breath in the worst way. We want to go, I'm just exaggerating, but we want to manipulate the breath. So it's best to just think in terms of breathing in and breathing out. Notice the beginning and the end. Beginning and end. And then when we feel somewhat of a flow, and it could just take a few moments for some of you, a few breaths, place your attention in the middle as well. Because believe it or not, that small time, that time frame between here and here, or here and here, is when the mind wanders off. So we breathe in and notice the middle of the breath, and we notice the end. So we're totally engaged with the breath. And what will happen, we'll notice that we're concentrated on the breath. And that concentration then leads into exactly what everything else that we're talking about. There are other things that the Bhante G talks about, kasinas, or colored discs that were used at one time. particularly around the time of the Buddha, they used these discs. They made them out of earth, and they were usually round, and then they'd use different elements to make them blue or to make them red, earth elements. And they would use these discs, and they could feel a kind of a union with one of these particular discs, whatever color it might be. And some of them would represent the earth or the water, the fire, or these types of things. And then people would meditate with their eyes open and using these discs. And if they closed their eyes and still saw the disc, they know that they were still concentrated on that disc. But these objects aren't really used very much anymore. But he addresses it in the book. And if you have any questions about that, you can bring it up next week. But some of the teachers, there's teachers in Burma that still use this method that I know about. And do they use that in some of the temples in Sri Lanka, the Kasina discs? No?
There
Oh.
are some areas now.
Yeah.
Centers.
Yeah, so they're still being used, but not, you don't hear about it very much.
Mostly in casinos, Burma.
Mm-hmm. And there's also, well, I was going to mention the sign, but we'll talk about that later. That's addressed in the book too. Another word, so eventually the breath will get so subtle that it won't even be noticed. But when we start to meditate, we want to set the intention, do a metta practice, and then bring our attention to the breath, noticing the beginning, middle, and the end of the breath. Right? So what I would suggest is that we probably maybe stand up a little bit, maybe get a drink of water if you want in back, and then we'll do our practice.